If you've been shooting film cameras for a little bit, you've probably been watching some videos, reading articles, and you've noticed that there's a great fascination with Leica rangefinder cameras. Leica rangefinder cameras seem to be kind of like the pinnacle of 35 millimeter cameras, maybe, film cameras in general. Lots of people aspire to someday have a Leica, and when they finally maybe get to be able to afford one or somehow get one, maybe they find one a really good deal on one, then it's a real joyous occasion. I got a Leica, really big deal. And if you look at the prices of Leicas and you're thinking about getting into rangefinder cameras, with interchangeable lenses, the prices can be pretty daunting. But there's some good alternatives that are very affordable, and so we want to look at those and see, what's available. So the way I kind of got started with rangefinder cameras many years ago, back when I was shooting film cameras, I was shooting 35 millimeter SLRs, Canons predominantly, and my brother shot Leicas, and I kind of like, oh, that's kind of silly, why would you spend all that money? And I went to a camera show. I was starting to do a little bit of camera repair, and I had some cameras I wanted to trade, and went to a camera show in Dallas, and I traded for a little 3A, is a 1935 3A screw mount Leica, and then I traded for a 50 millimeter f3.5 Elmar, collapsible Elmar, that was post-war. I think it was made in the 50s. And I wanted a lens that had, coating on it. And that little camera just made me really fall in love with rangefinder Leicas. It's hard to describe. It's kind of like a mystique around those cameras. The 3A kind of looks like this Canon. It's shaped, your traditional screw mount kind of Leica look. And, that really kind of get me started. And so then I really kind of understood it, and that led to an M3 Leica and an M4 II Leica and some lenses and an M1 Leica and a VisaFlex and a bunch of, it went on and on. And I really found I got rid of all my 35 SLRs. I was just shooting the rangefinder cameras. I used what they call a VisaFlex on the front of my Leicas to turn it into an SLR. A VisaFlex is a mirror box that attaches to the front of the camera, mounts on the front of it where the lens would go, and has a mirror in it like an SLR, and allows you to use it for macro or telephoto lenses, long lenses. And I gave up all my Canons and some Nikon 35 SLR. I think I kept a couple around, but just got rid of most of them because I just was shooting the Leicas, and I really loved it. Sadly, digital photography came in, film camera prices were really dropping. I kind of needed some money, so I sold all that. I kept the 3A Leica, and for quite a while, and later on, I think I gifted it to somebody, a friend, but something else I wish I hadn't done. But not too long ago, there's a video about it. I found a 35 millimeter f3.5 Lights Sumeron. It was mounted on an aircraft gun camera, and it was on Facebook Market. The camera and the lens were $60. It's about a $400 lens. That's this lens that's now on this Canon camera. And we're going to talk about that. You can kind of switch these lenses around between the Japanese and the German cameras, Leicas. And so I wanted a camera body to put that on. And I ordered this Zorky 6, and we're going to talk about the Russian cameras too. But then what I found is that the German and Japanese lenses aren't exactly compatible with the Russian bodies, and vice versa. So then I bought this Canon. It's called a Canon L2. I bought it very inexpensively, mounted the lens on it. This actually has a 35 millimeter viewfinder, and I was set. And I just really enjoyed using that. So I want to go over some of the options for inexpensive cameras, both Russian and Japanese, that you can buy that are very affordable, and what to look for when you buy them, and what kind of lenses and stuff to buy. So let's get started with that. We're going to take a look at it. Before we go any further, if you would, please click on the like and subscribe buttons. Let's get started. So 35 millimeter rangefinder cameras with interchangeable lenses kind of fall into two camps. There's kind of like the Leica camp and the Contax camp. And the Leica camp, even before World War II, the Russians started making a copy of the Leica II, which again looks a lot like this kind of little camera, but didn't have the slow speeds, just the speeds above a 25th of a second. And they made these copies, and they looked pretty similar to a Leica, worked pretty much the same way. Then after World War II, they continued with that, and another company, and again, I don't know the exact dates, but another company called Zorky started making also copies of Leicas. And as part of war reparations from World War II, the Russians got a bunch of equipment and material from Zeiss. So they got the plans and materials, and maybe even some personnel, to build the Contax camera, which they called the Kiev 4. And it looks just like, now this is a Contax 2A, which is a little bit later version, but looks very similar to the Contax 2. And so the Russians made both the Kiev 4, which is the Contax copy, and they made Leica copies. And then the Russian Leica copies kind of evolved on their own, and they still use the same lens, but they start looking quite a bit different than Leicas. Let's start talking about the Russian cameras in terms of the Leica copies. I'm not going to dive into the Kiev cameras. Frankly, I've never owned a Kiev 4. I've owned a couple of Contaxes like this one. They're beautifully made cameras. For some reason, and I can't explain it, and I've had a couple of these Contax 2As, these just never got me real excited. I don't know why. And I've got this one. I need to do a clean and lube on it. It doesn't always fire correctly. It's got a beautiful lens on it, so I'm gonna get it cleaned up and try to give it a whirl. Like, I had one of these when I was young, and I don't know, I just for some reason never quite fell in love with it like I did with the 3A Leica. So, like I said, the Russians, both Fed and Zorky, make copies of what looks like a screw mount camera like this. I haven't really kept up too much with the Fed cameras, to be honest, in terms of model numbers, because I've kind of gravitated towards the Zorky cameras. The Zorkys, there's a Zorky 1 that looks much like this, and then they start evolving. The Zorky 2 gets a little taller, and the rangefinder looks a little different, and then the 3 and the 4 looks much different with a really big viewfinder. The 4 and the 4K are probably the two most popular models. The 4 has knob wind, and the 4K adds lever wind. And they're very popular, and they, like I say, have a great viewfinder. But the one I actually gravitated towards was this Zorky 6, which I showed you earlier. I kind of like the styling of it. I like the way it looks. It's got film in it right now, so I'm not going to open it, but this has a latch on the end here you can pull up, and the back swings open, where most of the other Zorkys, you have to load from the bottom like a screw mount Leica. I don't have film in this so I can open it. You actually have to take this off, and you put your cassette in here and feed the film across. You have to kind of slide it all in at once, and you have to cut your leader like 4-inch long. The narrow part make like it 4 inches long. They're not real fast to load. Once you've done it a few times, you can do it pretty quickly, but a lot of the Russian cameras have that, or they'll have a loading system like this. The Feds often have a loading system that's, some of the later ones, that's similar to a Contax, where the whole back of the camera comes off, and there's a take-up spool here that you can lose if you're not careful. And so you take the back of it off to load the film. So some of the Feds have that mechanism. But yeah, I really kind of fell in love with this Zorky. It's lever wind. It only has speeds from a 30th up, so there's no slow speeds. It does have a self-timer. There's another model called the Zorky 5 that looks just like this, except it loads from the bottom, like the earlier Leicas, and it doesn't have a self-timer. And they're a little less expensive than the 6. This has a decent viewfinder and rangefinder, combined rangefinder viewfinder, and you notice how these two windows are so far apart compared to, say, the windows on this, which are closer together. This extra width, and it's one of the reasons the Contax was popular, is because it's called the rangefinder base, but the distance between the two windows, the wider it is, the more accurate the viewfinder. So this has ostensibly a very accurate viewfinder, rangefinder that is, and I just like the styling of it. I paid $60 for this with a lens. Actually, it came with a different lens. It came with this Industar 50, which is 50mm f3.5. It's not super fast, but I put this Jupiter 8 on here. I did a video about the Jupiter 8 using it on digital cameras last week, and so there's a video about that. Jupiters are really great lenses. So, you know, that the Zorkys and the Feds are pretty decent cameras. They're not the quality level of the Japanese and the German cameras. This is a Fed 5B. The regular 5 has a light meter. This one doesn't have a light meter. You notice that this one was made for the Olympics. Kind of cool. I actually bought this camera with this lens, which is a Jupiter 8 lens. It wasn't an eBay auction, it was just an auction I found. Actually, it showed up on my Facebook feed. It was a private auction, and I signed up for it. And this camera was on there, and I wanted the lens. I really wasn't that interested in the camera. But I got both camera and lens, the whole thing with the leather case and everything for $11. Then the shipping was, actually wasn't that bad, it was like $16. So, I mean, I paid more for the shipping than I did the camera. But again, I wanted the lens, and the lens usually sells for a bit more than that. Again, being a Fed, this loads from the bottom like the Contax. You actually take the back off to load film into it. And it's a little easier than loading from the bottom, but still not quite as fast as a hinged open back. But this has lever wind. This has the full range of speeds from 1 second to 500th of a second. And the rangefinder base on it isn't super wide, and the rangefinder viewfinder on this is not as bright as the Zorky 6 that I have. So it's kind of a neat camera. You notice it's taller than the Zorky. It's I don't know. To me, it just wasn't quite as stylish. It looks more blocky. I don't know. Functionally, it seems to be a great camera. I don't know. I like the styling of the Zorkies a little bit better. So anyway, I told you about getting this Canon L2 because of this Leica lens. The L2 is a later camera. Its basis is the Canon 5 series cameras, and this one has speeds from 1 second up to a 500th, and it has X-Sync for flash. It's actually got a flash sync terminal here. Lever wind, and of course a hinged open back, and it's actually got 2 latches. You undo this latch, and then you pull down this latch on the end, and then the back opens. The viewfinder actually can see 50 and 35 millimeter. You can see it right there. You can choose between 50 and 35, and RF, which is a really zoomed in rangefinder setting that allows you to find focus at greater magnification. And so this has been a great camera. I bought it from a company in Japan, so the shipping was like $30. But the camera was only $68. Now, the reason it was so inexpensive is it's got that ding right on the corner there. Someday I'll take the top off and iron that out. But that kind of stuff really drives the price down on the camera. And I just wanted something I could use. I don't really like that, but I can live with it. And I'll iron it out at some point, and it'll look better. It won't look perfect. And the camera isn't perfect. It's got some marks here and there. But functionally, it's in great shape. And that's why I bought it. The shutter's good. The viewfinder, rangefinder's good. Gave me a home for this Leica lens, and it was very affordable. Cameras like this Zorky, I think I told you I paid like $60 for. It was very inexpensive. Those prices have kind of gone up a little bit since I bought those 2 cameras. So the Zorkies, I don't know, you can probably still get one in the $60, $70 range. The Canon L2 is going to hit you about $120 for, unless you find one with a dent. They're typically going to go about $120 or more for the Canon L2. There's also an L1, which is just like it, but it has no flash sync, and there's an L3 that has a self-timer, I think. It's basically the same thing. And then there's the Canon 5, which is like this, but it has a full range of shutter speeds, up to 1,000th of a second, and the shutter is, I think it's got metal curtains, like black-coated stainless steel curtains instead of cloth. And then there's the 6, both L and T. The T is a trigger wind. It has a trigger on the bottom, and the L is lever wind. But the 6 series has a much better viewfinder with parallax correction, I think it has. And then there's the Canon P, which is very popular. The P stands for populaire. And the Canon Ps are very popular. And the last one was the Canon 7 series. There's 2 or 3 versions. But the Canon 7 has a great big, really nice viewfinder, rangefinder. And it's got a built-in light meter. The Canon 7 had a selenium cell meter, and a lot of those quit working by now. But the 7 got a little bit bigger, and not quite as big as this, but it got a little uglier, and so they're not quite as popular. But for a user camera, the 7s are fantastic. And because they're not quite as popular, they're a little more affordable. And recently, I don't know, I kind of had this itch. I wanted to replace that 3A Leica. And I didn't really want to pay the money for a Leica. I mean, it's not that much more, I suppose. So I bought a Canon 4SB. And actually, this isn't the first one I bought. So I found online a Japanese seller on eBay. and they had a 4SB, and it was like $120. Pretty reasonable price. The description was good. And so I bought it, and amazingly, these companies in Japan use really fast shipping, like FedEx shipping. So it comes in like 3 or 4 days, and from Japan. And when I got the first one, everything looked good on it until I looked in at the shutter. Took the lens off, looked at, well, didn't have a lens when I got it, but looked in where the lens would be and looked at the shutter curtains, and there was a little tear at the bottom of the first curtain, the one that rolls up and goes to the left. And that tear would leak light through it. So I emailed the people back, sent them a picture of the tear, and they said, well, we'll take care of you, we'll send it back, and we'll credit you. And they ended up, I have to say, they did just a fantastic job. They sent me the shipping label and everything to ship that camera back to Japan at their cost. I asked them, do you have anything else similar? I'd like to find just a good user camera. And they came back and said, well, the only one we have has just come out of our shop. It's just been cleaned and lubed, and it's got new shutter curtains, and it's $194, a little bit more money. And I thought, well, that's worth it. It's got all that fresh work done on it. And so they gave me full credit for the shipping and everything to send my other camera back. I just had them hold on to the funds for that camera. And when this camera, they got it ready to sell, I just paid the difference. It was like $70-something, and they sent me this one, and this one's just perfect, and so I really love it. The Canon, what look like a Canon screw mount copy, are different in that the Leicas have a separate rangefinder and viewfinder, where you've got a viewing window and then you've got separate rangefinder windows. This has it combined, and the Canon also incorporates this lever, which gives you full view, which is F. So you can turn it so you can read it. And then there's 1x magnification, which is basically the same as the view of a 100mm lens, and this, I think it was at 1.5x, is the same as the view of a 135mm lens. So you can actually use that to not only focus more accurately. If you want to zoom into focus, you can use it for some of the longer lenses. And it is knob wind, but it's got speeds from 1 second all the way to 1,000th of a second. 500th of a second. And just a beautifully made camera. And there's a lot of people that, when these cameras came out, basically said that this Canon 4 series, the 4SB, this is a 4SB2. The 2 meaning it has the modern range of shutter speeds. So the earlier ones had like a 1/10 of a second, a 1/5 of a second, a 1/10 of a second, a 20th of a second. So the progression wasn't the same geometric progression we have now, where now we have, a second, a half second, a quarter second, an 1/8 of a second. The sequence makes more sense, and it actually, each one is, each step you go up, you cut the amount of light in half, and each step you go down to a longer speed, you double the amount of light. Previously, it wasn't exactly like that. So, I mean, they're close, but they're not quite the same. So anyway, this is a beautiful shape. Got a really good deal on it, and so I've really been enjoying that camera. So let's talk about some of the things to kind of look for if you're going to buy one of these cameras, or maybe things to look out for. The first thing is overall condition. What does the camera look like? And you have to really look at pictures, read the description from the seller, and then very closely look at the pictures. And always make sure you're looking at anything you can to see. If you can see inside and look at the shutter curtains best you can, do that. You can even ask, in a lot of cases, you can ask for additional pictures. Make sure you're choosing a seller that has as close to 100% rating on eBay as you can get. I really I don't get comfortable below about 97, 98%. I start to get kind of nervous, because the lower they get, the more people weren't happy, and so that makes me worried. So the other thing you want to do is when you get the camera, check it over. My dog sees a rabbit running across the field out in front of me here. He wants the rabbit. So check it over very carefully. Like I spotted that thing with the shutter curtains. If I'd just thrown a lens on it and put a roll of film in it, I would have just ended up with a ruined roll of film, and then I would have discovered it and wasted the film. And so a lot of times you can see these problems. Look at the shutter curtains. if it's got a hinge open back, make sure you're looking at the seals near the hinge. And sometimes there's seals near the latch end of the door. Make sure those seals look good. If the seals are bad, don't send it back. It's very easy to replace. You can get black neoprene foam or sticky back felt from, you know, the hardware store or the hobby store, and you can make your own door seals. I wouldn't ship a camera back for door seal issues. But you know, look it all over. Make sure it winds smoothly. Does the shutter sound smooth? You know, when you fire it, does it have a really clean sound? You know, does it sound good? And the slow speeds, you know, you can hear the slow speeds when they run. It'll make a buzzing sound. You can. Did he do it? Oh, I didn't set it right. You got to set it on the right setting. Here you go. There, 1 second. You can hear that sound. And you know, run through the whole range of shutter speeds. Make sure everything sounds good. Make sure the viewfinder is clear. And on a rangefinder, you've got your view that you're seeing, and then you've got a patch in the middle that has a secondary image. And as you focus, the two images move back and forth, and you line those two images up until they're exactly lined up, and then you're in focus. And that secondary moving image, if it's dim or kind of hard to see, that can be a problem. And if they've said in their description that the viewfinder is, you know, in good shape, and sometimes they even state that the secondary image is you know, really bright, then, but if there's a problem with it, you know, that's something maybe to think about, because repairing that would be expensive. So that might be something you'd have to send it back. So far, I really haven't had too much issue with viewfinders. Where you're more likely to have a problem is you're going to get a shutter that's sticky, or like I did, I found a bad shutter curtain, things like that. So you kind of have to be careful. But if you choose your seller well, make sure they can do returns, then, you know, you're probably going to be okay if something goes wrong. Let's talk real quick about lenses. So there's Russian lenses and there's the German and Japanese lenses. And a lot of people will tell you you can buy a Russian lens because they're cheap and you can put it on your camera and it will fit. But it's probably going to have some focus issues. So here's the difference. The Russians, when they started making their lenses, they're using the lens formulas they got from Zeiss for the Contax. And the standard focal length for a Zeiss 50 millimeter lens is 52.4 millimeters. And the standard for Leica lenses is 51.6 millimeters. It's a tiny difference. It's not much, but it's just enough that, you know, in order to focus, so these rangefinders all go from 1 meter to infinity. And in order to focus from infinity to 1 meter or 1 meter to infinity, the amount of distance that the lens, you know, moves in and out as you focus that distance is a tiny bit greater if your lens has a focal length of 52.4 millimeter than it is if you have 51.6. So what happens if you put a Russian lens on a Leica or one of the Japanese cameras? They both have a lens flange to film plane distance of 28.8 millimeters. So it'll focus at infinity. But when you focus at 1 meter, you're going to find yourself focused behind where you thought you focused by about 2.5 inches. So if you've got someone, you know, close at 1 meter and you focus on their eyes, their ears are going to be in focus, you know. Now, if you've stopped the lens down quite a bit, so you've got some depth of field and you're not shooting up close that much, you might not really notice it that much. And you'll hear some people online say, oh, it's no problem, you can swap them, I did it, everything's great. But I promise you, if you go by that and you go by a Russian lens and then you try to put it on your Japanese or German camera, and you know, and then get critical about what your images look like, you're going to find that the focus has a problem. So in general, I tend to keep Russian lenses on Russian cameras and the Japanese or German lenses on the Japanese and German cameras. And you can swap between like Canon made lenses, Minolta. This has actually a Minolta. It's a Chiyoko, but that's Minolta before they were Minolta. Super Rocore. That Minolta made Leica copies. There's a company called Nikka that made them that used some, and they weren't related to Nikon, but they used Nikkor lenses. And in fact, Nikon made, as accessory lenses, they made Leica screw mount lenses. And they're some of the best. Some of the Leica screw mount Nikkors are just excellent lenses. So Canon made lenses, Nikon made lenses, Minolta made lenses. Yashica even made, I think it's the YF. They made a really interesting looking Looks like a rangefinder Leica, but it's got a lever wind and better viewfinder. Kind of an interesting camera. They're a little pricey because they're rare. But Yashica made a camera, and there are Yashica lenses, Yashica lenses. So there's a lot of lenses you can get. When you're buying lenses, the main thing I see with the Russian lenses, like I bought this one actually, and actually no, it was this Jupiter 8 that I bought, and I noticed that when I put it on my digital camera, sometimes the image, like, would be in focus at infinity, but the edges would be way off, or one side would be off. It was really weird. And I took the lens apart, and there's a group of lens elements in the middle that the retaining ring had come unscrewed, and those lens elements were just kind of flopping around inside the lens. And I noticed it because I shook the lens. You could hear stuff rattling inside the lens, which is never a good sign. So, you know, there's things like that you have to watch for. But one of the problems that seems to crop up with the Japanese lenses and the German lenses is that they can be hazy. And so when you're buying these lenses, either Japanese or German, if they've got internal haze, in a lot of cases on the Japanese lenses, it cannot be cleaned. It's actually, the coating has deteriorated and turned hazy, and you would literally have to polish it off with some very sophisticated equipment and then have the lens recoated, and all that would cost way more than the lens is worth. Some of the German Leica lenses can get hazy, like this 35mm f3.5 Sumeron was hazy when I got it, but I was able to, it was, what it was, often if you see haze that's on the middle elements around the diaphragm or the aperture mechanism, what it is oils from that mechanism have evaporated from heat and have deposited on the glass, and that haze can be cleaned off. And in the case of this lens, it cleaned off, disassembled the lens, cleaned the glass up, put it back together, everything was fine. If you don't know how to repair lenses, obviously you're going to have to pay someone to do that. So if a lens is hazy, I mean, sometimes the seller will say it's very faint haze or very light haze, no problems with taking pictures. And that's generally true until you have a really bright light coming in, then you're going to get a loss of contrast. So depending on how much haze is in the lens will determine how much contrast you lose. Lens still may be sharp, but it's going to be affected somewhat if there's haze. So try to be careful when you're buying lenses not to buy them that have haze. You'll pay a more premium price in general for a lens that has no haze, but it's worth it. And in the end, if you bought one that was a bit too hazy, you're not going to be happy with it. You're always going to wish you didn't have that, and then somewhere down the road you're going to buy something else. So just in general, to kind of wrap up, this is getting kind of long, but the Russian cameras are decent cameras. Keep Russian lenses on them. I think you'll be happier. They're not expensive. You can buy one, try out your rangefinder stuff and see what you like. If you want to go a little more upscale but don't want to go to the price of the German cameras, the Japanese Canon made a ton of these. Were very prolific. And so Canon rangefinder cameras are very easy to find and very affordable. Even these with lever wind and the hinged back and all that, you know, you can get these as cheap as you can get these. And they have a better viewfinder, and they have the lever wind and the, you know, easy loading and all that. These are great cameras, and they're very affordable. And they're compatible, of course, with all the Leica lenses. Voigtlander makes lenses. There's even, I think TT Artisan makes a 28mm lens. There's some other companies that have made some lenses. Konica has made some M-mount lenses. But there's a wide range of lenses out there. And so often you can find some pretty good deals. Well, so that's kind of it. I hope, you know, if you're interested in getting to rangefinder cameras, you'll take a look at some of these options. If you're just wanting to try a rangefinder camera to see what that's like for you, you know, one of the Russian, like the Zorky 5 or 6 or the 4 or 4K, I think the 4 and 4K are kind of, look like a tank. They're a little bit ugly in my opinion, but they're very functional and they're very popular. I'm not trying to speak anything bad against that model if you own one. But those cameras are very affordable, and the Russian lenses are really actually pretty good. This 61, Industar 61 is a beautifully sharp lens. The Jupiter lenses are also not only sharp when you stop them down, but they have some really beautiful soft effects when you open them wide open. This Industar 50 is one of the sharpest lenses you'll ever find. These Industar lenses are typically a Tesser design, the Zeiss Tesser design lens. And the Jupiter lenses are actually a copy of a sonar lens made by Zeiss. So the Russian lenses are all copies of Zeiss lenses, and some of them very good, better than you might imagine. So that's kind of it. If you have any thoughts or questions, please don't hesitate to leave me a comment. I always love hearing from you. And as always, thanks for watching.